Patrick Kinnamon is the founder of MakeMade, a manufacturing company in Northwest Arkansas that makes tools and machines with a precise technology. He's also active in the Citizens Climate Lobby, a group of individuals and business leaders advocating for changes in environmental policy. Kinnamon and I sat down to discuss the group's idea for a national carbon fee and dividend program, which might find new legs with a new Congress and president. Well, Patrick, welcome to the program. First of all, give me a little background on MakeMade. What exactly does MakeMade make?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Roby. I appreciate it. MakeMade is a local business here in Northwest Arkansas, founded with my partner 2 years ago. We create essentially what are automated power tools, more or less, 3D printers and CNC machines designed to help makers make what they want. It's really been a lot of fun. So we design, develop, manufacture everything in-house and distribute to our customers all around the world. It's really a fun business to be in, I'll tell you.
Let's talk about the Citizens Climate Lobby. What is the Citizens Climate Lobby for those who don't know, and how did you get involved with them?
Yeah. Citizens Climate Lobby is a grassroots, nonpartisan action organization that is very laser focused on finding ways to grow the economy through climate action. And I know that might sound a little bit counterintuitive at first, but we can get into it. So I actually met individuals from CCL way back, I think 6 or 7 years ago. So I've been with the organization since then. It's now grown to over 190,000 members. And we have actually groups in over 61 countries around the world. But we're primarily focused on introducing legislation known as carbon fee and dividend here in the United States as a meaningful way to address climate change.
Tell me what carbon fee and dividend is. It's different than carbon cap and trade, which has been a lot of the conversation for many years, but tell me what carbon fee and dividend is and how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is different and unique from cap and trade. Carbon fee and dividend is a market-based mechanism that essentially places a fee on carbon. It's predictable and steadily rising over time, and it's placed on carbon at the source of extraction or point of entry. So be it in other greenhouse gases as well. So be it at a mine, well, or at a port of entry. Now that fee is then carried obviously through the market and ends with the end consumer in terms of increased energy expense, which creates an incentive for the market to more rapidly move towards renewable energy sources. Now, while that sounds like it could be problematic for those end consumers, the dividend then comes in and that takes that fee and turns it into a dividend in a monthly payment back to all U.S. citizens to offset those increased energy costs. So you create that catalyst for moving towards renewable energy sources without the pain of actually paying those higher energy costs for those U.S. consumers.
So give me an example. Let's take natural gas drilling, for example. I think everyone in Arkansas has some sort of understanding of that. There's a well that goes down in the ground. It extracts gas, whether it's through fracking or some traditional methods. Tell me how carbon fee and dividend would work in that instance.
Sure. So for natural gas, there is an associated carbon pollutant that is released per ton, right? And so the question then becomes, how much carbon is released by that specific energy source? And we would place a $15 per ton fee initially on that source. And that fee would then ideally elevate slowly and predictably by about $10 a year over time. So whatever the carbon pollutant amount for that specific energy source is at the source, its future carbon amount, that is assessed upon extraction in the form of that fee. Again, that is collected there and then passed down to citizens.
So the disincentive to have to pay that extra money for whoever the company is that is extracting this energy source, that's what's going to create the reduction in usage is what you're arguing, right?
Absolutely. So when you look at renewable energy sources today, they are essentially on price parity with natural gas, coal, and other carbon-intensive fuels. We are already making this transition towards a renewable energy future. The question is, how quickly can we get there in order to mitigate as much of the climate impact as we possibly can? And by adding this fee, which is truly really assessing the actual cost of that carbon-intensive fuel source, we are able to help the market more rapidly move towards those other energy sources such as wind, solar, or for Arkansas, geothermal, much more quickly than we could if there was no carbon tax there or carbon fee there to begin with.
So twofold question here. So who regulates this? Who's going to determine what that cost is going to be, number one? And number two, this is obviously going to require some legislative action at the federal level, correct? Not the state level.
Correct. There are options to do this at the state level. Some states have looked at doing a regional carbon fee and dividend model, but ultimately this really needs to be done at the federal level. Because the mechanism itself is market-based, the amount of bureaucratic involvement is extremely limited. So it is irrelevant where the source of carbon comes from. Everything is covered by the fee, unlike cap and trade, where the federal government has to step in and determine which players are actually going to be involved in that cap and trade system, and which requires obviously a lot of bureaucratic engagement, a lot of administrative cost. Because of the simplicity of carbon fee and dividend, the administrative expense of this, the bureaucratic expense, so to speak, is expected to be far less than 1%. Compared to cap and trade, much higher than that. And ultimately, the simplicity, the market-based mechanism that we're putting forward actually reduces emissions much more quickly than a cap and trade system typically does. We're expecting something in the neighborhood of about 40% reduction in U.S. emissions over the first 12 years. So it's a very significant change from where we are today.
So just for a little bit of clarity here, because help me out because I'm kind of new to this. The legislation doesn't necessarily set the amount of what the fee is going to be. You're saying it's going to be more like a commodities trade, the price of oil, the price of natural gas, the price of this particular fee and dividend?
Actually, the government would set the price. So that is part of the legislation. So right now the proposal is $15 for the initial fee that's per ton of carbon emitted. And then from there, we would elevate by about $10 a year. And again, the great thing about that, as opposed to existing regulatory options, are that it's very predictable for businesses like MakeMade and others out there in the market who are trying to project what their forecast is going to look like in years to come. And when regulations are changing with each administration, it's very difficult for companies like that to really take a good level of certainty into those forecasts. Carbon fee and dividend gives players like MakeMade and anybody else in the market an opportunity to understand what these types of climate actions are going to be well into the future. It's why that organizations from the Fortune 500 are all about this type of option. Economists, faith leaders. We've got locally here, Rob Walton is a huge proponent of carbon fee and dividend, as well as individuals like Lindsey Graham and even Elon Musk. The economics of it are just so impressive. And generally speaking, when we look at climate action, it's always been about, well, yes, of course we need to address climate change, but what is the cost going to be to the economy? And that's really the real benefit of carbon fee and dividend. It's not to say that the economic detriment is less than it would be under another model. It's to say, no, the economic impact is not even neutral, but actually net positive for the overall economy.
So we have low energy prices in Arkansas, generally speaking. So will this not drive the price of energy up?
The price of energy, yes, would increase for those greenhouse gas focused sources of energy, those carbon intensive sources. Absolutely, there's no question. That is actually the goal of the proposal. But again, the difference here is that that fee that is generated, that creates that higher price point, is then returned to those citizens in that form of a dividend check. The interesting thing about it is that not only are working class and middle class Americans protected in this plan, they actually, in most economic models, come out benefiting more than if they hadn't received or had this policy hadn't been put in place. So when we look at the amount of fee that is created by this policy and look at how it reflects on individuals, an upper or high income individual in the U.S. is probably going to have potentially multiple vehicles, take longer, more travel, potentially even multiple residences. Working class, middle class Americans are going to have a much smaller carbon footprint, and therefore the increase they would see in energy expense is actually far less than the dividend that is ultimately paid out based on the weighted average of that cumulative fee. So what we end up seeing is working class Americans end up each month receiving more back in the form of a dividend check than they pay in increased energy costs. That creates an enormous amount of incremental spending power for working and middle class Americans, which obviously is a great benefit to the economy.
So the dividend check recipients, that's involuntary. You're just going to get it, right? This is the federal government cutting that check, right?
It is. It is expected that the program would work through all existing channels, ideally through the Internal Revenue Service. It is a very straight. We've obviously through this pandemic, we've been able to cut stimulus checks for individuals. That is something we're capable of doing. And the point of this policy is to be entirely revenue neutral. This is a large amount of money that would be generated, but this is not to be held by the U.S. government. It is to be immediately returned to the citizens so that they have that catalyst to move them forward towards renewable energy without being punished in the process.
So the quintessential climate change question is the U.S. could adopt this, but you've got other major countries around the world that might not. Number one, answer that argument for me. Number two, are there other countries that have already done this carbon fee and dividend program?
Sure, and that is an absolutely valid point. And I think, again, in that standard view of economy versus climate action, that type of question absolutely makes sense when we look at regulatory solutions that could create drags on the economy or on growth. But again, the great thing about carbon fee and dividend is that through economic modeling, we have proven that regardless of the climate impact, this is a net benefit to the U.S. economy. It makes the actions taken by, say, India or China essentially irrelevant from an economic standpoint. But ultimately, of course, the U.S. needs to be the leader out there. When we take action substantively on an issue like this, the rest of the world will take action as well. They will look to us for that leadership. As far as other countries or other areas that have done this before, yes, it absolutely has been played out before. British Columbia in Canada has a very similar model, and it works extremely well for their population. It has been extremely popular for them. Alaska has something actually very similar, given that extraction and mining is a big part of their economy, and it's also extremely popular there. Their citizens receive essentially a dividend check back for that as well. Extremely popular there as well. It's been done elsewhere around the world, but yes, it has been proven out theoretically and in practice.